Hey guys, tonight we will step into the hidden world of the Byzantine palace, where power and desire intertwine from the resounding war drums of the hippodrome to secret corridors and the infinite purple chamber, where Empress Theodora used her body as a weapon to seize intelligence and instigate the massacre of 30,000 people. We will uncover the mysteries of the clandestine feasts, the hidden passages leading to the throne room, and the seven-chambered pool that hosted deadly audiences. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Leave a comment below so we can connect. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Year 548 of the Common Era, behind the gilded doors of the Imperial Palace in Constantinople, Empress Theodora lay upon a bed swathed in imperial purple silk, the hue reserved solely for those who wore the diadem of the Caesars. Around her, the imperial physicians bent solemnly over pale flesh. Court officials knelt with heads bowed. Chanting priests filled the marbled halls with solemn litany. Yet only her most trusted attendants understood the true darkness that had shaped her life. Before ascending to the zenith of power, Theodora had once been the most notorious performer in the city's theatres. Legends persisted of her reclining amid a flock of geese, their beaks delicately pecking golden barley scattered across her form, while the throng roared with anticipatory delight. That scandalous spectacle was merely the opening act for a woman who would go on to wield her own body like a finely honed instrument of persuasion. As she opened her eyes one final time, Emperor Justinian, her husband and the most powerful man on earth, slumped by her side in unrestrained grief. His tears fell like molten jewels upon her silken sheets. The court roused itself into the choreography of mourning. Officials exchanged curt nods. Sacral rites commenced with measured solemnity, while behind the heavy tapestries the palace servants exchanged furtive glances. They carried in their hushed whispers the very secrets that, if laid bare, could shatter an empire. To the public, Theodora was the paragon of piety, builder of churches, protector of women, a saint in the making. To the court, she was the consummate stateswoman, commanding legions of bureaucrats, issuing edicts with her own seal, ordering the massacre of thousands of enemies without a flicker of hesitation. Yet to her confidants, the spies, the covert visitors who slipped through hidden passages under cover of night, she was the daughter of a bear-keeper who had trafficked her own flesh to plot her rise. She had rewritten imperial law to sanction her union with the emperor himself, overturning statutes that forbade senators from marrying former actresses. She had cultivated a clandestine network of lovers within the palace walls, each liaison a thread in her web of influence. And when her final breath eluded her waning strength, she died canonized by the Orthodox Church, her life's dramas eclipsing even the most lurid scandals of modern memory. Our understanding of Theodora's extraordinary life rests upon three pillars of evidence. First, the official chronicles composed under Justinian's patronage, which cast her as a penitent sinner redeemed by divine grace. Second, the secret history of Procopius buried in hidden archives for centuries, whose lurid allegations continue to spark fierce debate over their veracity. Third, the latest archaeological excavations beneath the palace foundations, unearthing architectural modifications and artifacts that suggest Procopius's accounts may yet understate the depths of Theodora's intrigues. This is no mere tale of forbidden desire. It is the chronicle of a woman who weaponized her own body to vault from impoverished obscurity to the very summit of imperial power. It is the story of how she manipulated dogma and law, faith and fear, to craft an enduring legacy that blurred the line between saint and sinner, sovereign and seductress. And so, as the purple twilight fades beyond the palace walls, we invite you to drift with us into the soft shadows of Theodora's court, where every whisper carried the weight of destiny, and every hidden corridor led to revelations that could topple emperors. In the hushed lullaby of shuffling silks and distant bells, prepare to uncover the ultimate paradox. How a once shamed actress rewrote the history of an empire with nothing but her wits, her will, and the indomitable power of purple. Year 500. 5 of the Common Era. When Theodora was scarcely 5 years old, her world collapsed in an instant. Her father, a humble bear-keeper responsible for the majestic animals parading before the crowds at the hippodrome, succumbed to a simple scratch that turned septic. The wound became infected, his blood poisoned in a matter of days, and he slipped away, leaving behind a grieving widow and 3 little girls whose lives depended entirely on the favor of the city's factions. With funeral rites barely concluded, Theodora's mother, driven by desperation more than maternal affection, led her daughters to the stone steps of the hippodrome. There, beneath the roar of the chariot race and the curious stares of the spectators, she implored the 2 great demes, that is, the Greens and the Blues, to offer protection. The Greens, loyally tied to her late husband, refused her plea outright, shunning the bereaved family. The Blues, ever eager to embarrass their rivals, accepted the children as a public slight against the Greens. Thus, 3 helpless girls were paraded before the very masses that once cheered their father's bears, transforming them into unwitting political tokens in a spectacle that would echo through Byzantine memory. By age 12, Theodora had been thrust into the world of performance, for in 6th century Constantinople, the line between theatrical art and transactional favor was all but non-existent. The law classified actresses as akin to those in the most sensitive professions. The public stage was both platform and brothel, performance and private service happening in tandem. On that stage, young Theodora learned to wield her presence like a seasoned diplomat. She would stand beneath the gasping arches of the theatre, clad only in a slender ribbon of cloth, as attendant servants scattered barley grains across her chest. Trained geese, white-feathered and bold, pecked at the scattered grains, inching down from her shoulders, tracing a path of delicate sensation that the audience watched in hushed fascination. Yet she did more than titillate. Every glance from a senator, every paused breath from a wealthy merchant or a future prince, was carefully noted and stored in the recesses of her sharp mind. Each sensual display was not merely an act of survival, but a calculated intelligence operation. Theodora catalogued names, faces, private appetites, and whispered secrets, building a vault of information that would one day propel her far beyond the footlights. Contemporary whispers claim she once served over 30 patrons in a single night, and that she even held competitions among her clients. Though these numbers may be exaggerated, they nonetheless attest to her staggering physical and mental endurance, a feat that defied human limits. Even in those years of youthful labor, Theodora exhibited powers of recall beyond mere mortals. She could commit to memory the exact voice inflections of a timid bishop, the favorite wine of a visiting ambassador, the private laments of a general who longed for lost battles. She mastered multiple tongues fluent in Greek, conversant in Latin, and adept enough in Syriac and Armenian to debate scripture with local clergy. She quoted Homer's epic verses and Aristotle's philosophical maxims with equal facility, impressing audiences who assumed such erudition could never coexist with her public profession. This union of intellect and body transformed Theodora into a phenomenon. For her, every Twilight performance was both lifeline and launchpad, and every admirer became a potential ally or a future debt of influence. While other performers aged and faded, she refined her art, honing it into a subtle power play that transcended the theatre's footlights. As her reputation grew first as an exotic curiosity, then as a mistress of nuanced intrigue, so too did her prospects. No longer merely a child sold into factional games, she navigated a path toward respectability, leveraging the very tools of her humble birth to negotiate her escape from insignificance. By blending the mesmerizing allure of performance with the unspoken discipline of espionage, Theodora guaranteed that when she finally left the stage, she would not return to obscurity. Instead, she would step directly into the corridors of real power, her mind fortified by early hardship, her body trained in the most intimate forms of persuasion. In the slow cadence of her teenage years, she was already rewriting her destiny, transforming from the bearkeeper's daughter, left to the mercy of rival factions, into a figure of intrigue more potent than any senator's decree. And so, as the amber lamps of the theatre dimmed around her, Theodora prepared for the grandest performance of all, the ascent to the purple throne itself. After a 4-year liaison with Governor Hezbollah of North Africa, which began in the autumn of the year 516 and ended in the summer of 520, Theodora found herself abandoned in Alexandria, penniless and alone. Yet she did not return to the shadows of the Constantinople theatres. Instead, she wandered through the great centres of learning and the hushed corridors of monasteries, immersing herself in Christian theology, most notably the Monophysite doctrine that would later inform her political alliances. She recognized early on that Christianity was no mere private creed, but the very backbone of imperial authority and social order. To master its tenets was to arm herself with moral legitimacy. During her year in Alexandria, precisely from the month of Thoth in the Egyptian calendar of 520 to the same month 1 year later, she committed the entire gospel to memory. She debated scripture with learned bishops, quoted passages from the Epistle to the Romans as effortlessly as she once scattered barley on a theatre stage. By publicly presenting herself as a penitent sinner seeking redemption, she carefully obscured the scandalous chapters of her past. Her pilgrimage home led her through Antioch, where some accounts suggest she first encountered Justinian, the adopted nephew of Emperor Justin. Though details diverge, the consensus places her arrival back in Constantinople in the spring of the year 522. She re-emerged, not as the famed actress of decades past, but as the spinner of wool, a modest trade that masked her intricate intelligence network. In 6th century Constantinople, wool spinning was viewed as a humble artisan's craft, even a respectable livelihood for women, yet it offered a perfectly unassuming front for someone whose real occupation was gathering intimate knowledge of the city's elite. Clad in simple garments and seated at her spinning wheel, Theodora blended seamlessly into the throng of marketumen. Senators and merchants passed by without suspicion, unaware that each whispered confidence, each furtive question about fine cloth or dye, was being filed away in her brilliant mind. She learned of bribes exchanged in private alcoves, of secret alliances forged beneath candlelit vaults, of vulnerabilities that threatened to topple established families. All the while she maintained the aura of a quiet widow supporting herself by honest labor. It was during these months of careful preparation that she conceived the most audacious plan of her life: to meet Justinian face to face under circumstances of her own design. She sent discreet gifts through intermediaries, spun wool dyed in imperial purple, perhaps, or fine silk embroidered with humble geometric patterns, each token a silent reminder of shared debt. Her network of former theatre patrons, now indebted to her past favours, arranged a private audience at a secluded gathering held by a minor court official. This meeting took place on the 15th day of the month of May, in the year 523, in a private chamber just behind the Hagia Sophia, its vaulted ceiling still bearing the unfinished mosaics of mosaicists imported from Antioch. She studied Justinian's routines with surgical precision. His late-night vigils over legal codices, inherited from his uncle, his preference for secluded theological debates at dawn, his unbroken celibacy and reputed devotion to monastic ideals. She knew he kept no known mistress, had never fathered an heir, and was rumoured to regard marriage as an unnecessary distraction. In turn, she fashioned herself not only as a convert worthy of his respect, but as the complement to his intellectual pursuits, a partner in law and in faith, and perhaps, though he did not yet know it, the only woman capable of guiding him through the labyrinth of court intrigue. On that spring day, as the dim morning light filtered through the high arched windows, Theodora entered the chamber clad in sober wool and a simple veil. She greeted him in flawless Koine Greek, then recited a passage from Isaiah that spoke of a ruler who would bring justice to the poor and peace to the oppressed. For the first time, Justinian's famed composure faltered. He was struck by her erudition, her conviction, and the unexpected warmth in her dark eyes. According to some chroniclers, he rose from his seat, too captivated to remain seated, while others claim he refused to drink water until she had finished her scriptural exegesis. Whatever the precise details, the outcome was irrevocable. Justinian requested further audiences within hours, and by the end of the week he was speaking openly of marriage. This audacious union defied every law of the land, every prejudice of the court, and every expectation of the populace. It set into motion a chain of events that would rewrite imperial statutes, and in doing so, reshape the course of Western civilization. Thus did a former performer turned spinner of wool engineer, the encounter that would propel her from humble artisan to the imperial throne. In the drowsy cadence of her final words that day, she had not only secured Justinian's fascination, but had also ignited the spark of ambition that would burn brightly in Constantinople's heart for decades to come. The meeting in the year 522 between Justinian, then 40 years of age, and Theodora, aged 22, was anything but accidental. For months prior, Theodora had orchestrated every detail. selecting a discreet venue in the shadow of the Hagia Sophia's unfinished dome, rehearsing conversational gambits, and arranging subtle touches of ambiance candlelight flickering against polished marble, soft strains of lute echoing in the background. According to the official court histories, Justinian was instantly captivated upon seeing her. Procopius, in his secret history, hints that she may have employed techniques honed in the brothel's pharmacia. He called it to heighten desire, yet all accounts agree on one point. Her keen intellect, artful humility, and striking beauty left him utterly enthralled. The ensuing courtship swiftly evolved into a full-blown crisis. Roman law of that era categorically forbade high-ranking officials from marrying actresses, no exception for former performers. Empress Euphemia, Justinian's adoptive mother and the reigning Augusta, erupted in indignation at the mere suggestion of such a union. She asserted that the taint of stagecraft was indelible, insisting that Theodora remain forever outside the sanctified circle of the Senate's wives. The imperial court trembled. To wed Theodora was to defile the imperial lineage, to imperil the honor of the very dynasty that had ruled since the days of Constantine. Under this pressure, Theodora adopted a masterful posture of victim of prejudice. She made no public demands, but let her predicament speak to the public conscience. She cultivated alliances with noble women of equally checkered pasts, aligning herself with charitable causes and visibly donating to the construction of churches and orphanages. She appeared frequently in public worship, her head bowed in pious devotion, all documented by scribes commissioned by sympathetic clerics. Fate intervened in the year 524, when Empress Euphemia passed away of natural causes at the age of 68. With the chief obstacle removed, Justinian marshaled his supporters in the Senate and achieved the astonishing, a revision of imperial law to permit reformed actresses to wed into the senatorial class. This reform was no broad gesture of clemency. It was unmistakably tailored to benefit Theodora alone. Yet it marked a decisive victory for her cause. In the year 525, the wedding of Justinian and Theodora became the event of the century. On the morning of the 15th day of September, Theodora entered the nave of the Hagia Sophia, wearing a robe of purple silk valued in excess of the annual tax revenue of a mid-sized province. She processed down the aisle as a symbol of rebirth, no longer the scandal-haunted actress, but the future Empress of Rome. Dignitaries from across the known world bore witness. Armenian princes, Gothic ambassadors, Egyptian officials all crowded the marble steps to honor the union. When Emperor Justinian's uncle and predecessor, died in the spring of the year 527, Justinian ascended the throne with Theodora by his side, not merely as consort but as co-ruler in all but name. She received the title of Augusta in her own right, maintained an independent seal, and presided over her own court with a dedicated treasury. Foreign emissaries presented gifts to her directly. Her edicts bore equal weight to those of the emperor. Thus did Theodora transform from performer to partner of the most powerful sovereign on earth. Between the ages of 22 and 24, she navigated a maze of prejudice, legal barriers, and courtly intrigue. By cultivating a carefully engineered public image of contrition, she secured the legislative change necessary for her marriage. In so doing, she shattered centuries of precedent and redefined the role of women in imperial governance. Yet her influence was not confined to ceremonial office. As co-regent, she issued laws protecting women from exploitation, championed the Monophysite clergy, and supervised the construction of hospitals and convents. When Justinian was occupied with military campaigns or drafting the legal codex that would bear his name, Theodora governed in his stead, receiving petitions, hearing appeals, and directing the administrative machinery of the empire. By the close of the year 527, the empire had acknowledged Theodora's unparalleled position. Once a marginalized actress, she was now the most formidable woman in the Christian world. In her wake, she left a transformed court, one where a woman's past no longer dictated her destiny if she possessed the cunning, the patience, and the will to reshape the laws themselves. And so, as summer winds shifted the sands across North Africa and the candles in Constantinople guttered in the twilight, Empress Theodora's ascent stood as testament to a singular truth. In a realm built on tradition and hierarchy, a determined individual could rewrite the rules, one law at a time, until even the darkest scandals became stepping stones to the throne. When Theodora stood beside Justinian, she was far more than a mere consort. In the year 527 of the Common Era, shortly after Justinian's accession, she was elevated to the rank of Augusta, a title that conferred imperial dignity in her own right. As Augusta, she presided over audiences with foreign ambassadors on scheduled days of the month, receiving emissaries from Persia, Vandal North Africa, and the Frankish kingdoms. She issued her own edicts bearing an independent seal of purple wax, distinct from Justinian's ivory emblem, and she maintained a separate court household with its own chancellery, treasury allocations, and cadre of officials. This level of official authority was unprecedented in Roman history. Never before had an empress wielded such direct control over budgets, provincial appointments, and the flow of diplomatic gifts. Yet, alongside her public prerogatives, Theodora indulged in what Procopius later termed her peculiar pleasures. The palace wing allocated to her, the southeastern quadrant of the great palace complex, was extensively remodeled under her direction. Hidden corridors, some as long as 40 feet, now connected the imperial baths directly to her private apartments. Beneath the marble floors, an underground bathing complex featured 7 interlinked pools, each maintained at precise temperatures by hydraulic pipes imported from India. Above them, mirrored panels tilted at calculated angles multiplied a single figure into an infinite procession of reflections. Exotic mechanical contrivances likely brought from the same eastern trade routes that supplied Justinian's silk-permitted secretive entrances and exits for her gatherings. The list of Theodora's intimates read like a who's who of the Byzantine elite. Generals who received unexpected promotions after private audiences, bishops translated to wealthy urban sees following discreet encounters, and foreign envoys who secured trade accords only after clandestine visits to her chambers. Every individual who passed through those concealed doors emerged with a silent, binding debt, an unspoken ledger of favours owed to the Empress. Meanwhile, Theodora carefully cultivated a public persona of devout piety. Each morning, she was among the first to enter the nave of Hagia Sophia, bowing before the altar with measured reverence. She financed the construction of at least 3 monasteries, one in Syria, one in Cappadocia, and one in Egypt, entrusting their administration to Monophysite communities that owed her personal loyalty. She commissioned religious mosaics depicting scenes from the Gospel, inscribing donor cartouches that bore her name alongside sacred images. In the law courts, she championed provisions strengthening protections for women against forced prostitution and trafficking, and she raised the penalties for procurers from a fine of 50 gold solidi to 100 solidi, doubling the punitive cost for those who exploited vulnerable citizens. Observers of the court were quick to note the stark discrepancy between her virtuous public deeds and her private entertainments. Chroniclers whispered of the architecture of hypocrisy, marveling that the same woman who ordered the construction of churches by day could host unrecorded revelries by night. This duality earned her the reputation of the living paradox in annals both official and clandestine. Yet Theodora's true power lay in the seamless fusion of her overt authority with an equally formidable intelligence apparatus, one built upon flesh and secrets. The network she maintained went well beyond scribes copying petitions. It included those hidden servants who polished the marble floors at dawn, unaware that every hushed conversation between officials was being noted. It extended to eunuch courtiers who, deemed incapable of seduction, were entrusted with memoranda on emerging plot lines and the private weaknesses of prominent figures. It reached into the orphanages she funded, where children were trained to listen for whispered schemes and to report them to her agents. Armed with this knowledge, Theodora exercised a silent dominion over her peers. Information about a general's failing eyesight, a senator's concealed debt, or a bishop's secret dalliance became leverage to compel obedience or, in extreme cases, to orchestrate a career-ending scandal. Those who knew the truth of her nighttime assemblies understood that discretion was essential for survival. Silence was the shield that protected them from ruin. Thus, Theodora's reign was anchored in a masterful blend of public legitimacy and private coercion. Thus did a former performer turn spinner of wool engineer, the encounter that would propel her from humble artisan to the imperial throne. In the drowsy cadence of her final words that day, she had not only secured Justinian's fascination, but had also ignited the spark of ambition that would burn brightly in Constantinople's heart for decades to come. The meeting in the year 522 between Justinian, then 40 years of age, and Theodora, aged 22, was anything but accidental. In that sleepy, shadowed court, power was measured not solely by armies or formal decrees, but by the depth of one woman's capacity to command both faith and fear. In the month of January in the year 532 of the Common Era, the city of Constantinople was plunged into chaos by what would become known as the Nika riots. Within the sacred precincts of the great palace, courtiers hastily gathered their treasures, preparing to flee, while Justinian himself remained motionless, his countenance as pale as the marble walls. It was then that Empress Theodora, having been summoned from her private apartments, confronted her husband with words recorded perhaps apocryphally by later chroniclers as, "Those who are born into purple prefer death in purple rather than exile." According to the most reliable sources, these words settled upon Justinian like a benediction, and he promptly ceded command of the loyalist forces to Theodora's direction. Under her swift decision, General Belisarius and General Mundus led disciplined detachments into the hippodrome, sealing every entrance and exit. What followed was less a battle than a calculated slaughter. An estimated 30,000 rioters and their leaders, men and women of both factions, were slain within the arena's walls over the course of a single morning. Confiscated estates and forfeited wealth of the condemned were redirected to fund the reconstruction of Constantinople. The crowning jewel of this effort was the new Hagia Sophia, whose vast dome would eclipse even its predecessor in both scale and splendor. Portions of rebel holdings were parceled out to those who had stood by the imperial couple, most notably the women who had once labored on the stage. From humble beginnings, many former actresses were granted funds to establish shops and workshops, elevating their status and cementing their gratitude. As the capital rose from the ashes, Theodora oversaw the redesign of its very arteries. Wide boulevards replaced narrow thoroughfares. Public parks were laid out with multiple gateways, and reservoirs were expanded to supply the growing populace. These civic improvements served not only practical ends, but also strategic ones, dispersing crowds and preventing the kind of mass gatherings that might spark further unrest. Back within the palace, Theodora presided over secret architectural projects, unrivaled in ambition. Hidden corridors snaked through the walls, allowing clandestine movement between wings. Soundproof chambers lined with special plaster and thick hangings shielded sensitive conversations from eavesdroppers. Below the floors, an elaborate bathing complex of 7 interlinked pools was extended, its heating and hydraulic systems imported from India and calibrated to exacting temperatures. These designs protected her personal retreats and maintained the privacy of the gatherings that continued unabated. Alongside her urban and architectural initiatives, Theodora advanced a suite of legal reforms framed as humanitarian. She enacted statutes strengthening protections for women against forced prostitution and trafficking, raising the penalty for procurers from 50 gold solidi to 100 solidi. She established official houses of refuge for repentant women, funded by the very wealth seized from the insurgents. These measures, publicly lauded as compassionate and progressive, simultaneously centralized oversight of a trade that had once been used against her. Thus, the Nika riots became the fulcrum upon which Theodora leveraged absolute control. She had extinguished the rebellion, redistributed its spoils to create loyalist constituencies, and restructured the city to forestall future insurrections. The dual machinery of state and shadow was now fully under her command, from the veteran legions who had carried out her orders to the network of informants who tracked dissent in the darkest corners of the capital. What had begun as civic crisis was transformed into an enduring instrument of power, and in the lull of rebuilding, Theodora's influence reached its greatest height. After consolidating her authority in the aftermath of the Nika uprising, Theodora set about weaving a surveillance network so comprehensive that it reached into every corner of the palace and beyond. Her first recruits were the chambermaids who cleaned the private apartments of high-ranking officials. These women, once anonymous servants, became her eyes and ears. They overheard private conversations as they tidied wash basins and folded fine silken robes, then whispered every fragment of gossip into the ears of Theodora's trusted eunuchs. Next, she formalized the service of the imperial eunuchs, known as the Eunici. These men, castrated in boyhood, were considered incapable of seduction and thus deemed trustworthy witnesses to the daily movements within the great palace. Each eunuch received a formal commission, complete with rank insignia, and an annual stipend drawn directly from Theodora's personal treasury. Their duties went far beyond guarding the private corridors. They were trained to observe, to memorize details, and to report any hint of disloyalty among the courtiers. Under Theodora's watchful eye, the Unici became a loyal cadre, answering only to her and operating outside the regular chain of command. Yet her network extended even further. Theodora financed orphanages in the heart of Constantinople, one in the ex-Bykon district, another on the slopes of the Marmara, and turned them into breeding grounds for what she termed her intelligence orphans. Boys were taught reading, writing, and the arts of record-keeping. Girls learned the subtleties of household management. When they came of age, these youths entered service as secret scribes and personal attendants in noble households. No duel of masked intrigue could escape their attention. They chronicled whispered plans in drawing rooms, noted the gestures of powerful generals, and mapped the clandestine meetings of high-born ladies. Year by year, these former orphans formed an invisible web, transmitting the minutiae of court life back to Theodora's office. In tandem with her human network, Theodora reimagined the very architecture of the palace as a system of acoustic and visual surveillance. Hollow pillars, each as tall as a man, and twice as wide channeled sound from one chamber to another, so that conversations held in the late hours could drift through labyrinthine ducts to a central listening room. Ornate windows, carved in geometric patterns, concealed peepholes through which discreet observers could watch entrances and exits. Underfoot, marble floors were laid with slender slits that captured the rhythm of hesitant footsteps, broadcasting them to hidden eavesdropping posts. After the fires of the Nika Revolt, she commissioned the construction of the Infinite Reflection Chamber, measuring nearly 120 feet in length. Mirrors angled along its walls multiplied a single figure into an endless procession. Adjacent stood the subterranean bathing complex, with its 7 interlinked pools, maintained at precisely measured temperatures by Eastern hydraulics. And beyond all these lay the so-called Purple Corridor, a secret passage some 60 feet long, permitting unobserved travel between her private apartments and the southwestern gardens. These architectural marvels served a dual purpose. They nurtured Theodora's clandestine gatherings, and they created formidable barriers against any outsider's attempt to slip into her sanctum. Moreover, Theodora maintained a vast epistolary network that spanned continents. She corresponded in cipher with queens of the Vandals in North Africa, with monks in distant monasteries of Syria, and with Gothic princes in Italy. Each letter contained hidden codes, names that signified troop movements, phrases that indicated shifts in church politics, numbers that corresponded to secret tracts buried beneath city walls. Through these missives, she gauged the loyalties of foreign courts, preempted diplomatic challenges, and even provided justification for military expeditions when imperial interests were threatened. This web of informants, chambermaids, eunuchs, orphan-turned-scribes, architects, and foreign correspondents allowed Theodora to exert a level of control unmatched by any preceding Roman empress. Intelligence gleaned from the most mundane sources became the foundation for statecraft. When a bishop's letter mentioned discontent in a remote province, she dispatched envoys to quell rebellion before it took flame. When a general's wife confided her husband's doubts in a whispered prayer, Theodora could anticipate military insubordination. In the drowsy hush of her private palace, with the faint drip of water echoing from the hidden pools and the soft rustle of secret memoranda passing between eunuch hands, Theodora reigned supreme. Her power lay not merely in armies or edicts, but in the silent accumulation of knowledge, every scrap of it painstakingly transformed into leverage. By the time night fell across Constantinople, each candlelit corridor and each echoing hall bore witness to her omniscient gaze, and every soul within the palace knew that in Theodora's realm, no secret could remain for long. Alongside her far-reaching intelligence apparatus, Theodora turned to the medical arts as a precise instrument of control and elimination. Beginning in the autumn of the year 532, she instructed the imperial physicians, numbering precisely 16 in the Great Palace, to compile detailed health reports on every senior official. Each dossier recorded chronic illnesses, deteriorating vision, signs of neurological decline, and other maladies. These records, maintained in the so-called Book of Shadows, became predictive tools of statecraft. Any high-ranking individual whose health declined precipitously was flagged as a candidate for displacement, a vacancy in need of filling by one of Theodora's loyalists. Most insidious among her methods was the administration of a slow-acting toxin imported from the kingdoms of India. This poison, delivered in minute doses mixed into wine or savory potages, caused victims to lose motor control and cognitive coherence over the course of months, their final demise attributed to natural causes by court chroniclers. A notorious case occurred in the summer of the year 534, when the senator Photius, who had threatened to publish documents exposing Theodora's nocturnal gatherings, fell into a paralysis so profound that he remained bedridden for exactly 3 years before passing quietly in his sleep. His physicians, sworn to secrecy, recorded only that he had succumbed to a rare form of progressive palsy. Equally chilling was the fate of Macedonia, Theodora's former theatrical rival. In the spring of the year 535, following an invitation to a private dinner in the Purple Corridor, she was discreetly treated for what court doctors described as an acute nerve infection. Over several weeks, her sensory nerves were systematically damaged, likely through microsurgical techniques unknown to Western medicine, leaving her alive, yet unable to feel touch, taste, or pleasure. She survived another 2 decades, living in enforced silence, a living testament to the Empress's ruthless ingenuity. The list of patients extended beyond disgruntled senators and rival actresses. In the year 536, an influential bishop was reported to have died of rapid-onset paralysis. A sitting judge never returned to court after an extended illness noted only in passing medical logs, and a wealthy merchant vanished from public records following a bout of feigned consumption. In each case, the victim's family continued to receive the stipend designated for their roles, as though their relative were serving in distant provincial posts, never suspecting that imperial edicts had clandestinely sealed their fates. In parallel, Theodora established purification retreats within remote monasteries. One such facility, founded in the rugged hills north of the Bosphorus in the year 533, served as a sanctuary for those accused of treasonous knowledge. Under the guise of spiritual reflection, these prisoners were quietly confined in cells that offered minimal sustenance and no possibility of return. The monks assigned to these monasteries, grateful for imperial patronage, served as both jailers and confessors, extracting the last admissions of guilt from those who would never again see the sunlit courtyards of Constantinople. By intertwining medical subterfuge, lethal pharmacology, clandestine architecture, and monastic obscurity, Theodora perfected a system of cleansing that left no visible scar. There were no public executions, no bloody uprisings stifled by marching legions, only the gradual fading of political opponents into natural infirmity or indefinite spiritual retreat. This method of removal was so discreet that contemporaries spoke only in vague rumours. A shadow illness here, a missing nobleman there, a hermit monk's whispered tale of a foreigner who entered seeking penance and never emerged. In the hushed stillness of the imperial baths, where the gentle hiss of heated water mingled with the faint rustle of embroidered textiles, Theodora reigned supreme. Her adversaries were undone not by swords, but by the slow dusk of failing bodies and the enforced solitude of remote cells. Each unrecorded death or disappearance added to her aura of invincibility, reinforcing the unspoken understanding that resistance was folly. For in Theodora's court, the truest power lay in the quiet art of erasure, an art that ensured her rule remained unchallenged, her secrets hidden, and her empire intact, even as her enemies slipped away into the eternal night. Throughout her reign, Theodora maintained a facade of devout piety that concealed her more clandestine operations. Each morning, precisely at the first toll of Hagia Sophia's bells, she would slip into the nave for the daily liturgy, kneeling before the altar in humble prayer. She financed the construction of no fewer than 3 monasteries, one in Antioch, consecrated on the 19th day of April in the year 533, another in Alexandria, completed on the 2nd day of December 534, and a third in Cappadocia, dedicated on the 25th day of March 535. In each foundation charter, she stipulated endowments sufficient to support at least 17 monks or nuns, as well as the maintenance of an attached infirmary. Beyond brick and mortar, Theodora engaged directly in theological discourse. She regularly summoned senior clergy for debate on points of Christology, often siding with the monophysite position that Christ possessed a single, unified nature. These assemblies frequently took place in the imperial study, a vaulted chamber whose lectern bore her personal seal of office. Bishops who accepted her hospitality, and listened to her arguments, were rewarded with lucrative translations to wealthy sees. In the year 536, Bishop Size of Cyrrhus received support to rebuild his cathedral after an earthquake, a grant personally authorized by Theodora on the 5th of June. In exchange, he and his fellow prelates pronounced her marriage to Justinian Sacrosanct, forbade any sermon critical of the Empress, and declared that defamation against her person constituted mortal sin under ecclesiastical law. Thus did the patriarchal courts of the Church unwittingly become an arm of imperial public relations. Skillfully, Theodora interwove her religious patronage with a network of spiritual intelligence agents. She endowed Monophysite communities in Syria, affiliate houses in Edessa and Apamea, and in Egypt, at the monastery of Street Pachomius near Thebes. These establishments, each housing approximately 30 monks and novices, were instructed to compile weekly reports on local conditions, troop movements on nearby frontiers, fluctuations in grain shipments along the Nile, and any unrest within diocesan congregations. Twice each lunar cycle on the full moon and new moon they dispatched these memoranda, in sealed jars, routed through trusted couriers directly to Theodora's private archives in the palace. When matters demanded, she quietly opened the hive, inviting pilgrims to her chosen monasteries with the promise of indulgences. There, among the throngs of supplicants, she and her agents identified individuals of particular talent or influence, men favoured for diplomatic service, women for their linguistic gifts or familial connections. These recruits formed a spiritual eye dispersed across the empire. During public religious festivals and extended devotional cycles, most notably the 40th day commemorations of the Nika uprising, held each year from the 13th to the 22nd of January, Theodora orchestrated her own signal intelligence. She assigned discreet attendants of the sacred couch to processional routes, each wearing clergy's vestments beneath plain cloaks. They noted which senators whispered among themselves during the great entrance, which notables lingered near the imperial gallery when the Empress paraded her finery, and which foreign envoys exchanged furtive glances at the liturgical texts. Musical ensembles performing hymns were instructed to modulate tempo and volume to direct attention toward or away from particular officials on the marble floor. Coloured lanterns, white for purity, purple for authority, were lit in precise sequences to underscore her presence and remind all observers of the inseparable bond between the divine and the imperial will. In these grand ceremonies, Theodora curated the choreography of faith and power. The clergy processed in strict hierarchical order, with her emissaries strategically placed among the laity, ready to signal her approval or disapproval by subtle gestures. When the gospel was proclaimed, she often rose to her feet, prompting a spontaneous wave of reverence among worshippers. These orchestrated displays served a dual purpose. They honoured sacred tradition while subtly reinforcing that her authority was sanctified by divine favour. Theodora's most profound achievement lay in her ability to redefine holiness on her own terms. By sponsoring religious legislation such as the Second Edict for the Protection of Women, issued on the 14th day of July in the year 537, which increased penalties for sexual violence against widows and orphans, she cloaked her secular reforms in sacred language. Critics who objected to her nighttime entertainments or her secret tribunals found themselves accused of sacrilege and thus silenced. In effect, religious law became indistinguishable from imperial decree. To defy her was to deny the will of God. Through this careful fusion of overt piety and covert coercion, Theodora wielded religious authority as both shield and sword. She drew upon the Church's moral credibility to obfuscate the more questionable aspects of her rule, while deploying ecclesiastical structures to neutralize dissent. In the hush of burning candles and the echo of sacred chants, she sustained her empire's most delicate balance, one in which faith and politics were so thoroughly entwined that even the loftiest sermon served as a reminder of her unassailable dominion. In the final 2 years of her life, Empress Theodora quietly battled what court physicians believed to be ovarian cancer. From the spring of the year 546 through the summer of 548, she concealed her decline beneath layers of tinted makeup and the voluminous folds of ceremonial robes. As her strength ebbed, she took care to erase the darkest traces of her secret reign. In June of the year 548, precisely 3 days before her passing, she ordered the burning of countless confidential files. Over 70 cartloads of parchment vanished in the palace furnaces, reducing to ash the records of clandestine audiences, lists of names slated for discreet retirement, and detailed accounts of her pharmacological operations. During those 3 days of cremation, she summoned 15 of her most trusted confidants, eunuch secretaries, orphan-turned scribes, and a handful of the Unici to impart final instructions. Some of those summoned disappeared immediately afterward, reassigned to distant provincial commands. Others were inexplicably promoted, their sudden elevation ensuring their silence. On the 28th day of June in the year 548, Theodora drew her final breath. Emperor Justinian remained at her side without pause, an almost unheard-of display of vulnerability for a Roman sovereign. His tears fell unheard in the dim glow of the private chamber. True to her carefully managed image, Theodora confessed only to the standard liturgical formula of sin and repentance. She refused to divulge any further truths of her hidden realm. Witnesses recorded her last words either, "I regret nothing," or, as some claim, "Purple is sufficient." Both utterances, delivered in measured tones, resonated with the same commanding confidence that had defined her life. Her funeral rites extended over 3 days, from June 29th to July 1st. A procession of mourners stretched for nearly 3 miles through the marble streets of Constantinople. Every bell in the city tolled in unison, a chorus of lament that lasted without pause. Theodora's body, embalmed with techniques borrowed from Egyptian masters, was swathed in layers of purple silk, so costly that even a single bolt might have funded a year's grain tribute for a small province. Public viewings were carefully controlled. Only trusted court officials were allowed close enough to glimpse her visage. The tomb itself was a closely guarded secret. Only Justinian and a handful of inner-circle dignitaries knew the precise location of her burial within the imperial mausoleum. In the aftermath of her death, Theodora's influence persisted, shaping the empire's destiny. Justinian never remarried, preserving her memory as though her presence remained indispensable. Rumors circulated that certain officials who had once openly celebrated her demise met untimely ends, falling ill with sudden fevers or perishing in mysterious accidents. Whispers suggested these incidents were the vengeful handiwork of Theodora's lingering network, even in death. The palace itself underwent a systematic purge of her private architecture. The secret passageways she had commissioned were sealed off. The 7-chambered pools beneath her apartments were dismantled and filled in. The infinite reflection chamber was stripped of its mirrors and converted into storage for ceremonial archives. Any surviving documents that might have survived the initial purge were either burned or locked away in hidden vaults. Yet, over the centuries, shards of her clandestine world re-emerged through archaeology. In the 20th and 21st centuries, excavators uncovered sub-basements with unusual plumbing channels, discovered human remains bearing signs of torture and prolonged restraint, and even recovered fragments of silvered glass that hinted at the Hall of Mirrors she once inhabited. These relics, silent witnesses to her private domain, attest to a power and passion that defied even the empire's official records. Theodora's extraordinary journey from the daughter of a bear-keeper performing on stage to a ruler feared and revered concluded with her passing. But the imprint she left on Byzantine law, architecture, religion, and collective memory endured. Statutes she championed continued to protect women long after her era. Churches she founded remained centers of Monophysite devotion, and the name Theodora lingered on court lips, a symbol of both sanctity and ruthless artistry. In the hush that followed her death, one unanswerable question echoed through the corridors of power. How could the same woman be both saint and executioner, seductress and stateswoman, a mistress of public piety and private coercion? The paradox of Theodora remained unsolved, woven into the very fabric of an empire that she had shaped, and which, even in her absence, bore her indelible mark. After securing her dominion within the empire, Theodora cast her gaze beyond Constantinople's walls and wove an intelligence network that spanned 3 continents. Beginning in the winter of the year 533, she established encrypted correspondence with queens and princesses from the Frankish realms in Gaul to the Persian court at Ctesiphon, from the Vandals in North Africa to various princely courts in Italy and the Levant. These letters, sealed with her personal signet and encoded with a cipher devised by palace cryptographers, served not only as vehicles of diplomatic exchange, but as conduits for military intelligence, dynastic intrigues, and shifting tribal alliances. By the summer of 535, no kingdom within the ecumene lacked an eye of Theodora's making. Whenever foreign ambassadors or prominent merchants arrived at the Golden Gate, they found themselves under discreet surveillance. Their banquets were attended by palace attendants subtly planted among the waitstaff. Contracts signed under the vaulted ceilings of the great palace were copied by invisible scribes, and off-book conversations in dimly lit vestibules were memorized by reticent eunuchs. Theodora's analysts pored over every detail. Who hesitated before drinking the offered wine? Which general lingered to inspect the mosaic patterns on the wall? Which bishop concealed his true sentiments under polite deference? From this data, she constructed psychological profiles identifying those motivated by fear, those driven by ambition, those tempted by greed, and tailored her diplomatic overtures accordingly. A merchant inclined toward profit would be promised exclusive trading rights. A tribal chieftain, anxious about territorial loss, would be subtly threatened with imperial intervention. A prelate concerned for his position would be assured of ecclesiastical favor. All were drawn into her web of influence. Inside the palace, Theodora perfected the art of psychological hospitality. Beginning in the autumn of 534, she hosted gatherings where herbal concoctions prepared by court apothecaries using recipes acquired from Indian traders were discreetly added to the wines or breads. These nootropic blends lowered inhibitions, sharpened emotional response, and encouraged candid confession. As the guests, freed from their usual reticence, divulged private intentions, their words were recorded on wax tablets stored in locked cabinets behind the Empress's private study. These revelations became potent leverage, deployed only when needed to bend defiant officials to her will. To systematize her operations, Theodora created a registry of minds, staffed by individuals with extraordinary mnemonic capacities. Recruited from the orphanages she had founded, these supremely gifted recorders shadowed key figures, even as they appeared to serve as minor attendants. They noted every appointment, every dining menu, every anecdote exchanged at council gatherings. Over time, each target's dossier grew to hundreds of detailed entries. Daily routines, preferred courtesies, hidden worries. With a single glance at a name, Theodora's advisors could pinpoint the slightest vulnerability and apply the necessary pressure to ensure compliance. Complementing this cerebral network, she extended her reach into the spiritual realm through what she called the Prayer Watch. Monasteries and parish churches across Cappadocia, Syria, and Egypt, particularly those of Monophysite allegiance, were funded to maintain confession logs and spiritual diaries. Penitent officials and military officers, seeking absolution, disclosed their deepest anxieties and regrets to confessors loyal to Theodora. These priests forwarded synopses under the guise of theological reporting, alerting her to dissident sympathies, treasonous thoughts, or wavering loyalties. The fear that a whispered admission could resurface as a capital charge kept many would-be critics permanently cautious. Combined, these elements, diplomatic ciphers, banquet psychotropics, mnemonic archivists, and spiritual informants, formed a comprehensive psychological and informational leviathan. Theodora, from the dimly lit confines of her private chambers, orchestrated policy across the Mediterranean world. She dictated the terms of peace negotiations with Persia, preempted revolts in North Africa, and influenced succession debates in the Frankish kingdoms. Her power lay not in the clashing of swords, but in the imperceptible pressure applied through intimate knowledge of every mind that touched her empire. In this quiet empire of whispers and subtle coercion, Theodora became the nervous system of a realm that spanned mountains and seas. Her signature and her softest suggestion carried more weight than any imperial edict. Night after night, as the lamps burned low and the palace corridors settled into hushed reverence, her unseen network pulsed with information, ensuring that no secret remained hidden and no challenger dared to speak out, because in Theodora's world, silence was the surest path to survival. In tandem with her far-flung diplomatic maneuvers, Theodora poured immense resources into the private quarters of the great palace, transforming its hidden chambers into what might best be described as an artisan workshop of indulgence. In the aftermath of the Nika uprising in January of the year 532, she commissioned the expansion of the southeastern wing. Architects from Syria and master carpenters from Egypt were summoned to oversee the project. Once their work was complete precisely on the 7th day of December, in the year 533, each specialist was discreetly dispatched to frontier garrisons, ensuring that no blueprint or technical secret might leak beyond the palace walls. At the heart of this renovation lay the Purple Chamber, a 60-foot-long hall whose marble floor concealed an intricate underfloor heating system. Laid with interlocking mosaic tiles imported from Antioch, the heated slabs maintained a constant temperature, neither too warm nor too cool, regulated by valves patent-marked by Syrian engineers. The chamber's 4 walls were inlaid with polished onyx mirrors, angled to create an infinite corridor of reflections. Beneath the center of the floor, a concealed hydraulic mechanism could raise or tilt a central bed by as much as 30 degrees, facilitating discreet entries and exits during private audiences. Overhead, oil lamps suspended on wrought iron mounts glowed with adjustable intensity. A gentle amber for quiet conversation, a richer violet-tinged flame for more evocative gatherings. Beneath the floorboards, hidden in a vaulted basement, a small orchestra, violin, lute and sistrum played from behind a sound-dampening screen, their melodies transmitted through acoustic tubes to perfect the mood. Adjacent to the Purple Chamber, Theodora erected a private theatre designed for closed performances. The stage, spanning 20 feet in diameter, was framed by velvet-draped arches and equipped with concealed trapdoors. Numerous provisions in the code reflect Theodora's strategic interests. Family law articles were revised to allow the redistribution of property to those loyal to the throne. Inheritance rules were rewritten so that assets of those condemned in the Nika revolt passed automatically to imperial favorites, and marital regulations were tightened to prevent annulments without explicit imperial consent. Their repertoire ranged from traditional tragedies to elaborate tableaux vivants, each scene scripted to flatter the Empress or to coax confidences from her illustrious guests. These gatherings were never mere entertainments. They served as arenas for political negotiation under the cloak of intimacy. Merchants seeking exclusive grain contracts, foreign envoys negotiating truce terms, and generals proposing troop deployments were all invited to partake in the chamber's offerings. As flower-scented incense curled through the heated air, subtle agreements were struck. Loans secured by promises of future favors, military support exchanged for trading concessions, land rights formalized in whispered oaths. Though no parchment bore these unofficial accords, the participants understood their binding nature, what Procopius later termed the unwritten Treaty of Purple. Loyalty was tested in this space as deftly as any sword. Those deemed unsuitable, too outspoken, too wary of the Empress, or insufficiently compliant, found themselves quietly sidelined. Invitations ceased, their tables went unprepared, and they were gradually excluded from the inner circle. Even long-time admirers, who had once extolled her virtues in public forums, could awaken to discover that they were no longer welcome in the purple glow. As the cold corridors fell silent behind them, many realized too late that invisibility in the Purple Chamber meant the end of influence, wealth, and status. In essence, the private wing of the palace was an integrated system of advanced architecture, mechanical engineering, pharmacology, and elite personnel. It functioned as a covert command center where Theodora could indulge her personal pleasures, exercise unchallenged authority, and broker the hidden transactions that shaped the empire's future. Month after month, year after year, she presided over these velvet-lined chambers, gathering whispers and planting suggestions, secure in the knowledge that behind the facade of sumptuous ease lay the true engine of her power. In the hushed luxury of the Purple Chamber, Empress and Empire alike were forged in the delicate alchemy of desire, secrecy, and the unspoken demands of survival. Aware of the lethal power of secrets, Empress Theodora took meticulous steps to ensure that her hidden empire would die with her. In the final days of June in the year 548, she ordered the palace crematorium to burn her most sensitive archives without pause. From the 25th to the 27th day of June, the furnace roared continuously, consuming 72 wagon loads of parchment secret dossiers, ledgers of blackmail, and lists of those marked for retirement. As smoke curled through the chimneys, 15 of her closest retainers were summoned to witness the purges. Some palace eunuchs and senior scribes were quietly reassigned to distant provincial commands, their silence bought by the promise of rank. Others were promoted into positions of honor, ensuring their loyalty until their last breath. Simultaneously, the palace's clandestine architecture was methodically dismantled. Hidden chambers and underground tunnels, those that bore the hum of heated water and the echo of secretive footsteps, were filled with concrete and overlaid with new vaulted ceilings. The infinite reflection chamber, once lined with polished onyx mirrors, was walled off behind a masonry facade. Hydraulic valves beneath the purple corridor were capped and buried beneath mosaic floors. The Syrian and Egyptian engineers who had brought these marvels to life were each sent to serve on distant frontiers, where survival rates for imperial overseers seldom exceeded 30%. All building plans and mechanical schematics were locked away in a black vault, accessible only to Theodora's closest confidants, few of whom remained. After Theodora's passing, Emperor Justinian preserved the palace as she had left it. He strictly forbade any inquiry into the sealed-off sections, and the secret corridors became legend royal mysteries that no one outside the inner circle dared approach. Yet centuries later, 20th and 21st century archaeologists uncovered sub-basements rooms not on any surviving blueprint, revealing evidence of concealed bathing pools, labyrinthine passages, and anchor points for the mirrors that once created infinite reflections. These discoveries hinted at the deliberate erasure of an architectural wonder, purposefully buried to hide her most private domains. Across the ages, sensitive documents survived only in fragments hidden within monastic libraries. Under orders from later patriarchs, many of these manuscripts were burned, but a few hand-copied scrolls remained, annotated in cryptic symbols. Historians studying these relics believe they form a cipher of sins, a coded record of Theodora's unspoken decrees and secret undertakings, though the true meaning of the symbols remains elusive. In parallel, Theodora's court surgeons established what was known only in hushed tones as the underground hospital. Victims who had been dosed with the slow-acting poisons individuals once held for interrogation were brought to this subterranean infirmary. There, they were given countermeasures to restore health, only to be transferred to secluded locations far from the capital, their disappearance attributed to extended travels. At the same facility, the most dangerous of her opponents were maintained in a vegetative state. Neither fully conscious nor dead, they lingered in hidden cells, forgotten by all but the silent attendants who cared for them. Such measures of cleanse and conceal were so artful that even high-ranking officials could not distinguish between genuine illness and the workings of the Empress's dark protocols. The palace medical logs, written in standard medical Latin, recorded only progressive wasting or acute paralysis, never revealing the subtler truth of poisoning or enforced stasis. Despite this systematic obliteration, traces of Theodora's clandestine world persist. Excavations beneath Constantinople's old palace site have unearthed skeletal remains, bearing unusual trauma consistent with prolonged restraint and shards of mirror polished to a reflective sheen, far removed from standard mosaic. Fragments, sections of lead piping, whose routing defies the water needs of any known bathhouse, hint at hidden plumbing networks. These material ghosts evoke a bygone court, one steeped in secrecy and desire, yet buried under layers of concrete and centuries of silence. To future generations, the palace beneath the palace remains an enigma. Modern scholars can glimpse the vestiges of Theodora's power: ancient bones, cryptic manuscripts, subterranean chambers. But the full tapestry of her dominion remains forever out of view. Beneath the metropolitan sprawl of Istanbul, drifting among the strata of stone and soil, lie the buried echoes of a reign that mastered both the light of public spectacle and the shadow of unseen machination. In the quiet night, one can almost hear the distant drip of water through sealed tunnels and imagine the ghostly reflections of a mirror that once stretched into oblivion, a reminder that some secrets, no matter how deeply entombed, refuse to vanish entirely. One of Theodora's most enduring legacies lies in her profound reshaping of Justinian's legal framework. In the spring of the year 524, she secured the passage of an edict formally permitting reformed performers to wed into the senatorial class, overturning centuries of Roman law that had barred anyone who had once trod the stage from aristocratic marriage. This transformation directly paved the way for her own union with Emperor Justinian. That same year, she championed statutes designed to protect women from sexual exploitation, a law raising the penalty for abducting or trafficking a free woman to 100 solidi, up from 50 solidi, legislation criminalizing forced marriages with fines of 80 solidi, and regulations mandating state-funded support for female prisoners, including the provision of medical care and vocational training upon release. Though heralded as progressive humanitarian reform, these very statutes also served as instruments of control. Anyone who dared reveal the empire's most sensitive secrets could find themselves prosecuted under newly defined clauses of public morality, effectively silencing potential whistleblowers. The monumental Corpus Juris Civilis, commonly known as the Justinian Code, bears unmistakable marks of Theodora's influence. Compiled between the years 532 and 537 under the emperor's direction, it codified Roman law and became the bedrock of Western legal tradition. Numerous provisions in the code reflect Theodora's strategic interests. Family law articles were revised to allow the redistribution of property to those loyal to the throne. Inheritance rules were rewritten so that assets of those condemned in the Nika revolt passed automatically to imperial favorites, and marital regulations were tightened to prevent annulments without explicit imperial consent. The law concerning confiscated estates in the aftermath of rebellion, enacted on the 10th day of October in the year 533, specifically prioritized grants to veterans of Belisarius's campaigns, reinforcing Theodora's network of support within the military hierarchy. Beyond jurisprudence, Theodora stamped her vision onto the cultural rituals of the court. She standardized the sequence of imperial ceremonies determining who knelt, who stood, and in what order that took place in the Flower Palace and the Great Hippodrome. The preference for purple became absolute. Court officials were required to wear at least a band of purple thread on their garments during audiences, a decree promulgated on the 18th day of November 525. Even the subtle tilt of a head during the imperial salute captured in mosaics and reliefs was refined by Theodora's edicts to evoke a sense of reverence bordering on worship. Many of these customs persisted long after her death, their origins forgotten by later courtiers who simply followed tradition without recalling why they bowed in a particular manner or why purple dominated every decorative scheme. Theodora's architectural patronage extended into the realm of sacred space as well. Churches and monasteries she founded, such as the convent at St. Euphemia in Chalcedon, consecrated on the 5th day of May 536, revealed hidden features, subterranean corridors linking the narthex to private cells, water conduits diverted from ritual fountains to serve secure living quarters, and concealed chambers beneath the choir stalls. The most famous of these ecclesiastical legacies is the mosaic of Theodora in Hagia Sophia, installed on the 12th day of August 537. While ostensibly portraying her holding a jeweled chalice, scholars have identified embedded motifs, ancient symbols of fertility, and celestial cycles that would only be legible to those initiated into her inner circle's esoteric knowledge. Literature of subsequent centuries immortalized the paradox of the fox in piety's veil. Poets composed epic verses extolling an empress who, by day, knelt in prayer and gave alms to the poor, and by night hosted clandestine feasts in hidden galleries. Dramatists staged plays in the Hippodrome's Odeon, weaving tales of a sovereign who wielded Christ's name on her lips, even as she orchestrated the downfall of her enemies. Dancers, actors, and singers were selected through a rigorous process. Veterans of the city's old theatres, talented novices from the orphanages she supported, and even former nuns from Monophysite convents, all trained in the arts of seduction and subtleties of courtly address. Each performer wore a tiny purple dove tattoo on the inside of the wrist, a discreet emblem visible only through mirrors arranged at specific angles. Even after much of the superstructure was demolished or repurposed by later emperors, these folk stories endured in the taverns and marketplaces, whispered by storytellers who claimed that in the city's underbelly, one could still find the old keys and the faint echo of mirrors reflecting into eternity. Though much of Theodora's physical realm has vanished beneath the layers of stone and soil, her legal, architectural, and cultural transformations continue to reverberate. Byzantine law, shaped by her interventions, influenced Lombard, Frankish, and later Western European codes. Courtly ceremonies across the medieval world borrowed elements of her ceremonial order. And even today, the very notion of state-sponsored social welfare for women finds its distant antecedent in Theodora's pioneering statutes. In every stitch of purple thread, every written statute, and every whispered legend, the indelible mark of Theodora endures testament to a reign where sanctity and seduction coalesced in the grand tapestry of imperial power. And so, as the candles in the imperial gallery gutter and evening's hush settles over the silent stones of Constantinople, we draw the curtains on Theodora's extraordinary tale, allowing its last echoes to drift gently into the twilight. In the soft glow of memory, her life reveals itself not merely as a chronicle of ambition and intrigue, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the transformative power of knowledge, and the profound complexities that lie within us all. We have walked with her from the humble boards of the theatre to the highest seats of power, witnessed her masterful weaving of law and faith, architecture and espionage, and seen how she harnessed the very tools of the state to remake a world around her vision. Yet beneath the grandeur and the shadows, perhaps the greatest lesson she offers is that every life contains multitudes light and dark, sanctity and sin, vulnerability and indomitable strength. In her story we find a mirror, inviting us to acknowledge our own contradictions, to embrace the parts of ourselves we sometimes hide, and to remember that history is never simple, never wholly one thing or another. As you lie back now, allow these images to blur softly at the edges. The purple chamber's infinite reflections fading into darkness, the secret corridors falling silent, and the gentle lap of heated waters in hidden pools slipping beneath the stones. Let the clamour of courtly whispers quiet into a distant murmur, until only your breath remains, slow and regular, in the still night air. May you carry with you the courage to seek knowledge, the wisdom to wield it gently, and the compassion to temper your own power with humility. Like Theodora's final whispered words, "I regret nothing." May you find peace in the choices you make, and trust in the strength that lies within you. Now, as the last vestiges of candlelight dim into the restful embrace of night, I invite you to drift into your own peaceful reverie. May your dreams be kind, your sleep restorative, and your waking filled with curiosity for the stories yet to come. Good night, dear listener. If you enjoyed this journey through history's hidden corridors, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss the newest tales we uncover and share. Sleep well, and until our next voyage into the past, rest in comfort and wonder. Sweet dreams.